Ever feel like there's a whole universe of sound out there just waiting to be explored?
Like music has hidden depths we haven't even begun to understand.
Exactly. And today we're diving into a system that's trying to map that universe, something called MUMEx.
The brainchild of composer Sir Louis Siciliano.
And it's not just about mapping music as we know it, right? It's about giving composers tools to create entirely new sonic landscapes.
New musical universes, basically.
That's what I find so fascinating. We're not just analyzing Beethoven here. We're talking about the potential to build something completely new,
And our guide for this deep dive is MUX Episode 3.
which gives us a glimpse into how this whole system works.
It's a completely different approach to music theory. Instead of thinking about notes on a page, like traditional notation,
Right.
MUMEX asks us to imagine sound existing in a multidimensional space.
Okay, so instead of hearing a melody as just a linear sequence of notes,
It's more like a sonic explosion, a
Ah,
web of possibilities.
I like that, a sonic explosion. So how does it actually work? What are the basic principles here?
Well, the foundation is something called Harmonikale Space, which is where all these sonic possibilities exist.
Harmonikale Space.
And every sound in this space has a kind of sonic shadow, projections of itself at fixed intervals.
Okay, so let me see if I'm following this. Let's say I play a C on the piano.
Okay.
In MUMEX, that C isn't just a C, it's also projecting echoes of itself. Like we might hear a D, a G, an F sharp, all based on these intervals.
You got it. And those projections, they aren't random. They follow specific gradients ranging from a minor second, which can sound a bit jarring, all the way to a major seventh, which is generally considered more pleasing to the ear.
So instead of just a single note, we're suddenly hearing a whole spectrum, a sonic web, all stemming from that original C.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Just like in astrophysics, where objects interact through gravity, these sonic projections in Harmonikale space, they influence each other. Siciliano calls this interaction a multiverse.
Musical multiverses. Okay, now you're speaking my language. So we're not just talking about individual notes casting these sonic shadows, but entire melodies, harmonies, rhythms, all influencing each other.
Absolutely. And he calls these individual melodies or groups of sounds universes. Each universe has its own character, its own set of rules, but they're always interacting, colliding, merging.
So how does that work? Does Siciliano give us like a roadmap for these cosmic collisions?
He does. He outlines three main types of universe interactions: parallel, specular, and intertwined. And each one creates a different kind of musical effect.
All right, I'm ready to explore these musical multiverses. Let's start with parallel universes. What are we talking about here?
In UMAX, parallel universes are musical lines that move alongside each other, separated by a fixed interval.
Okay,
So imagine hearing two melodies, one a perfect fifth above the other.
gotcha.
They're distinct, but they create this beautiful harmony because of that consistent interval.
So it's like those rounds we used to sing in school, where one group starts a bit later, but the melodies fit together.
Exactly. Similar concept. And just like those rounds create a feeling of depth, parallel universes add complexity and richness to the music. It's one of the ways MUMEX helps us understand how composers create those moments where you feel like you're hearing multiple layers of music at once.
That's really cool. Okay, so we've got parallel universes, these melodies kind of echoing each other. What about specular universes? The name makes me think of mirrors, reflections.
You're on the right track.
Mm.
Siciliano actually uses the terms solar and lunar to describe these opposing polarities within harmonikal space.
Okay.
Imagine one musical line ascending while another one is descending. They mirror each other's movements, but in opposite directions.
So it's about contrast, like one melody is the sun and the other is the moon, each reflecting a different kind of light. Only instead of light, we're talking about sound.
Exactly. And just like with those reflections in a mirror, there's a sense of connection even though the images are reversed.
I see, I see. Does that create a kind of tension in the music, like a push and pull?
Exactly. Think about the tension between a high note and a low note.
Yeah.
They create this dynamic space.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about parallel universes and specular universes. What about the last type of interaction, intertwined universes? What happens when these musical universes get all tangled up?
This is where the multiverse gets really interesting, maybe even a little messy. Because
Oh,
now we're talking about multiple musical lines interacting across various intervals, not just one fixed distance. They're weaving in and out of each other, creating all sorts of new sonic possibilities.
so it's like a cosmic dance party, but instead of bodies bumping into each other, it's melodies, creating these unexpected harmonies and rhythms. But you said it's not just random, right? There's still some kind of order to this musical chaos.
Exactly. Even in these intertwined universes, there's an internal logic at play, what Siciliano calls the engine of the sonic ecosystem.
So it's like this system has its own laws of physics, but for sound.
Precisely.
I like that.
And it allows for both incredible complexity and a surprising degree of structure.
That's fascinating. So we've got these musical universes colliding, creating all this complexity. But how do we actually start to navigate this sonic cosmos? Does MUMEx give us a map, a compass, anything?
It does. And just like a real map, it's got landmarks and points of interest.
Oh, okay.
Siciliano gives us asteroids, systems, semi-systems, even nebulae to help us find our way.
All right, I'm picturing these cosmic objects floating around in Harmonikale Space. This is getting exciting. So let's start with these asteroids. Are they like giant chunks of sound hurtling through this sonic universe?
Not quite. I like to think of them more like stepping stones.
Stepping stones.
Yeah, they help us get from one point in Harmonikale space to another, but in a more musically interesting way.
So instead of just leaping from one note to the next, an asteroid is like a little detour. It adds some flair.
Exactly. Imagine a melody that jumps up a perfect fifth.
Okay.
That's a pretty big leap, musically speaking.
Yeah.
An asteroid could be that minor second that smoothly connects those two notes, makes the transition less jarring.
So it's like, instead of just walking straight to your destination, you take a winding path, you meander a bit, enjoy the scenery. Those detours are the asteroids.
I love that analogy. And just like a garden path can be made of different materials,
Yeah.
asteroids can be single notes, clusters of notes, even whole chords. They add this element of surprise.
Right, right. This is really helping me see how this system works on a practical level. It's not just theoretical. It's about the little details that make a piece interesting.
Absolutely.
So how did these asteroids fit into the bigger picture?
Well, they play a key role in what Siciliano calls systems, which are like symmetrical musical structures.
Okay, symmetrical how?
He actually provides these visual representations, which, I'm not gonna lie, they look kind of like something out of a geometry textbook. But basically, each system has a specific pattern of notes on this grid. Some are symmetrical, some are diagonal, some spiral outwards.
So it's like we're looking at the blueprints of these sonic structures. And you said he sees these systems as being inherently perfect.
Yeah, and that's because they exist within this larger sonic ecosystem.
So there are these inherent laws of musical physics at play, and these systems are the most elegant solutions.
Exactly. And the really mind-blowing part is that these systems can create these incredibly intricate musical patterns. Siciliano calls them canoni palindromi.
Which are?
They're like musical palindromes, so they sound the same forwards and backwards.
Oh, that's like next level musical architecture. So you've got these perfectly balanced systems. What about the semi-systems? Are those like the black sheep of the family, breaking all the rules?
Not breaking the rules, but definitely bending them a bit. Think of them as variations on the systems, but with less emphasis on perfect symmetry.
So a little more wiggle room, a little more room for the unexpected.
Exactly. They bring a bit more flexibility and surprise to the music. It's like the difference between a perfectly symmetrical garden and one that's a little more wild and overgrown, both beautiful in their own way.
I like that. I'm a big fan of a wild garden. What about these nebulae? That sounds mysterious.
Think of nebulae as bursts of sonic energy.
Okay.
Those moments in a piece where the music suddenly expands in unexpected directions. It's like that feeling you get when you hear an incredible crescendo and the music is just exploding with emotion.
Okay, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
You said earlier that these nebulae can exist both inside and outside of Harmonikale space. What does that even mean?
Well, this is where we get into this other realm that Siciliano calls chaotic space. It's this idea that there are sonic possibilities that might not fit neatly into the more structured world of Harmonikale space.
So it's like MUMEx is giving us a map, but even the map has those areas marked, here be dragons.
I like that. And those uncharted territories can be full of wonder, excitement.
Or danger.
Right. It's a reminder that there's always more to discover, even beyond the system itself.
So we've explored these individual elements, asteroids, systems, semi-systems, nebulae, even dipped our toes into chaotic space. But how does this all come together to create larger musical structures in MUMEx? How does this system explain how melodies and harmonies actually work?
That's where galaxies come in. They're like the melodic counterparts to the harmonic structures we've been discussing.
So if the systems and semi-systems are like the architectural plans, the galaxies are the actual melodies we hear soaring through the sonic space.
A beautiful way to put it. Imagine each galaxy has a distinct melodic structure, and the thing that defines it is the intervals between its notes.
Okay, so a melody that's mostly minor thirds is going to have a totally different vibe than one built on major thirds.
Exactly. One might sound melancholic, the other more uplifting. And just like a real galaxy can contain billions of stars, these musical galaxies contain a huge number of notes and melodic possibilities.
It's like those time-lapse videos of stars swirling around a galaxy. Only instead of light, it's sound.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that Siciliano connects these galaxies to the ragas of Indian classical music.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. I've heard bits and pieces of Indian classical music, but I'm not sure I see the connection to MUMEx.
So in Indian classical music, a raga is essentially a melodic framework, a set of rules for improvisation. And each raga has a specific set of notes and a particular ascending and descending pattern.
Okay.
And what's really cool is that these patterns are also based on intervals, just like Siciliano's galaxies.
So it's like he looked at this ancient system of Indian music and saw a reflection of his own explorations in Harmonikale Space.
Exactly. He recognized a shared language.
Wow. Even though these systems developed totally independently.
And he actually draws direct parallels between specific ragas and his galaxies.
Yeah.
For example, he mentions that the Yaman raga lines up with a galaxy that has a repeated pattern of +2, +2, +2 in MUMEx. Those are the intervals between the notes.
That's amazing. It's like he's bridging these different musical traditions, showing how they can be understood through a shared lens.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder what other connections are still out there.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking a lot about melodies, but what about the harmonic dimension, the chords that underpin these melodies? How does MUMEx deal with that?
That's where we get into the really dense part of the system.
Okay, lay it on me. I'm ready to get dense.
We've been talking about melodies as these celestial objects, these galaxies, but we need to address the chords that underpin them.
Right. We can't forget about the chords.
Exactly. So how does MUMEx explain that vertical dimension of harmony? That's where Siciliano introduces sound aggregate blocks,
Sound aggregate blocks.
or SVs for short.
SABs. Okay, it sounds like we're getting into the really dense, meaty part of the system.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
So what are these SABs all about? Give me the rundown.
Think of them like dense star clusters, those tightly packed groups of stars.
Okay.
But instead of stars, we're talking about clusters of notes.
Clusters of notes.
Yeah, that form the harmonic foundation of a piece.
So if I'm understanding this right, galaxies are the melodic contours, those big sweeping lines of sound, and the SABs are the chords underneath, adding depth and color.
You got it.
Okay.
They're like the building blocks of harmony in MUMEx. And just like you can arrange bricks in countless ways to create different structures, SABs can be manipulated.
Oh, interesting.
Using techniques like inversion, flipping them upside down, or rotation, shifting the notes around to create all sorts of harmonic progressions.
So it's not just about the chords themselves, but how they move and change over time?
Exactly.
And I'm guessing these manipulations can create some really interesting effects.
Absolutely. Think about the difference between a chord progression that smoothly resolves versus one that creates a sense of tension or suspense.
Right, right.
A lot of that comes down to how the chords are voiced, how they relate to each other.
And that's what Siciliano is getting at with these SABs and their manipulations.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he places a lot of emphasis on the bass line.
The bass line, right? That often overlooked hero of so much music.
I know, right?
Why is it so important in MUMEx?
Well, think about it this way. The bass note is like the foundation of a house. It sets the tone for everything else.
Okay.
Siciliano argues that the interval between that bass note and the root of the chord, the note the chord is named after, has a huge impact on how we perceive the harmony.
So even if you have the same chord, like a C major, playing it with a G in the bass is going to sound and feel very different than playing it with an E in the bass.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's just one example. He talks about using intervals like a minor seventh, which might create a bluesy feel, or a tritone, which can sound quite dissonant, unresolved.
Right.
It's like he's giving composers a whole new language for thinking about harmony.
That's incredible. It's amazing how much detail goes into this system. It's really quite impressive.
I know, it's really remarkable.
So you talked about Galaxies, SABs, these big, large-scale structures. What about the really tiny details of sound?
Yeah.
The nuances that give music its texture and emotion.
Right.
Does MUMEx address that as well?
It does, and this is where things get really, really intriguing.
Okay, let's hear it.
Siciliano dives into what he calls the microcosm of sound. This is where he explores timbre,
Timbre.
the unique sound quality of different instruments.
Right, right.
And microtones.
Okay.
Those intervals, even smaller than a half step.
So we're zooming in from galaxies and nebulae down to the subatomic particles of music.
Exactly.
Wow.
And he quotes the composer Giacinto Scelsi, who said that sound is spherical and multidimensional, with mysterious depths to explore.
It's true. When you really listen, it's like this whole other universe opens up.
I know, right?
You're saying MUMEx allows us to explore sound with that same sense of wonder.
Exactly. Siciliano isn't just trying to create a new system of music theory. He's trying to change the way we experience sound.
I like that.
He wants us to live in the sound, as Scelsi put it, to immerse ourselves in the richness and complexity of it all.
Live in the sound. That's beautiful. It's like he's reminding us that music isn't just about intellectual understanding. It's about feeling, connecting to something bigger than ourselves.
Yes. And that brings us to a really important point, I think.
Okay.
With a system as complex as MUMEx, it can be easy to get bogged down in the technical stuff.
Right.
But Siciliano is very clear that the ear is still the ultimate judge.
So all these systems, all these galaxies and nebulae, it all comes down to what sounds good to our ears.
Exactly. He encourages musicians to use MUMEx as a tool for exploration, to trust their instincts.
I like that. That's great advice.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there, if MUMEx is this new language for understanding and creating music, what's next? What new soundscapes can we imagine using this as our guide?
That's the exciting part. It's all still out there waiting to be discovered. Who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to make the next great musical breakthrough using the tools of MUMEx.
That's a great note to end on. If you're ready to explore more of these musical galaxies, be sure to check out the show notes for links to Sir Louis Siciliano's work and more information about MUMEx.
And let us know what you discover.
Until next time, keep your ears open to the music of the cosmos.